Hi, folks, this is Mike, and we're going to take a few minutes to talk about how to fold up your tent. It might seem like a pretty straightforward process, and I guess in some respects it is, but I've seen a lot of guys over the years pay very little attention to how they take care of their tents. And the result of that is you end up with a lot of damage. You've got lacerated rain flies, you've got dry rot, you've got mold, holes in the floor, all kinds of things that can happen. Some of these happen while the tent is pitched, but the vast majority of damage that happens to tents, in my experience, happens during transit and storage. So, what I want to do is show you a technique I came up with a few years ago for taking care of all of my tents, and it's worked really well. This tent right here by Wild Country, in this picture, that tent is 25 years old, and it looks brand new, like it just came out of the box. It's amazing how these tents will hold up, especially if you buy a top quality tent, a mountaineering tent. It's going to hold up for a long time if you take proper care of it. So let's take a look at the steps of how to pack this thing up. The first step you want to do is lay your tent body out on top of the tarp. I always use a tarp for a footprint underneath my tent. Some tent companies make a footprint for their tents, but it's made out of tent bottom fabric. It's waterproof and it's fairly strong, but it's not nearly as strong as a tarp. The nice thing about the tarp is you can throw it away after about 2 or 3 seasons if it starts to get worn or get holes in it or whatever, and tarps are really cheap. So put that tarp underneath your tent body, and when you pitch that tent, you're not going to get lacerations in the floor from sharp rocks and sticks and so on. Tent's going to last a lot longer. That's the weakest part of the whole tent, usually, is the floor. So you're going to lay your tarp out that you've used for a footprint, and you're going to roll it up in that tarp through this process. So that's step one, lay the tent body out on top of the tarp. The second step is you're going to fold the tent in thirds lengthwise. And what you want to do is measure the width of that folded tent using the tent bag as a yardstick. And the reason why we have to do that is because when we get done rolling this thing up, it's going to have to go in the tent bag. So you don't want to roll it longer than the tent bag, otherwise you're going to have a problem. And if it's shorter than the tent bag by too much, it's going to be too fat to fit in the tent bag. So you've got to come up with a compromise. The best way to do that is to lay the tent bag out down at the end of your folded tent and make sure that the folded tent is no wider than the tent bag. I like to make it a little bit short, maybe about 2 inches short. And that way, when I roll the thing up and put it in the tent bag, I can cinch the bag down, and I lose a little bit of that head space at the top when I cinch it down. So fold your tent body up into thirds. The next step, step 3, is you're going to fold the tent body back over on itself by about 30%. And you'll notice here in this picture, I've got tarp all the way around the whole package. And the reason why we're doing that in that way is because we're going to completely enclose this tent body in the tarp. And that keeps it nice and protected, not only from abrasion and things like that during transit, but also from water. If we're on a float hunt, we could get splash on the tent bag and then your tent body gets wet. It's really hard to get things dry out in the field. So we want to keep it dry if it's already dry and by enclosing it in the tarp. Okay, step number 4, we're going to do the same thing with the rainfly. What we've done here is we folded our rainfly in half lengthwise, and we've laid the top edge of the rainfly right along the edge of the tent body, and we're going to fold that rainfly up so it sits right on top of the tent body. And that means we're going to gather it in from left to right, and we're going to fold the ends over so it sits right on top of that tent body. Any of your tie-down cords and things like that, you're going to want to lay them on top so you don't have anything sticking out past the tent body or past your tarp. Step number 6, pretty simple. Fold the bottom edge of the tarp up over the tent and the rainfly, and that's going to be the beginning of our enclosing the entire package in the tarp. So that's what we're doing here. By the way, if the rainfly is wet, and a lot of times if you're on a float hunt, you're going to break camp in the morning and maybe float all day, and you're going to break and set camp multiple times. You'll be doing this every time you break camp. If the rainfly is wet, what I like to do is lay it out on the brush and do that as early as possible. As soon as you get out of bed, you know you're going to be leaving that day. If it's not raining, pull the rainfly off and let it hang out there on the brush and get dried out. If you can't do that, if it's not dry because of condensation from breathing the night before, you're going to get a lot of that underneath the rainfly. Or if it's raining, then what I'll do is I'll take that rainfly and I'll put it in a trash bag and pack it separately from the tent. Again, the tent is dry. We want to keep it dry. And if we put that wet rainfly on there, we're going to soak the tent. So we'll pack the rainfly separately if it's wet. Step number 7, we're going to fold the tarp over on top of the tent body and the rainfly from right to left, similar to the way we folded up the tent body itself way back at the beginning. And then step number 8, we're going to fold it the other direction from left to right, so the tent is now completely enclosed in that tarp. And then towards the end here, we're going to take our whole package and we're going to roll it up really nice and tight. But before we do that, we want to pull the tent bag out one more time and measure our width to make sure that the package is not going to be too long to fit in the tent bag, or too short and be therefore too fat to fit in the tent bag. The compromise is to make the overall package about an inch or two shorter than the tent bag, and then you'll be able to cinch that tent bag down. You've got enough headspace for that tent bag to close up on it. All right, and then step number 10, you're going to go ahead and slide the entire package down into the tent bag. What I've noticed over the years is no matter how tight I roll that tent, it seems like it really wants to fight me going into the bag. So what I'll do is I'll spin the bag, kind of in this case, if you can see the edge of the tarp down at the bottom of the picture there, what I'll do is I'll spin my bag counterclockwise, I guess it would be, or I'll rotate the tent body as I'm putting it in the bag. That way I'm not unfolding the tarp. I'm kind of going with the direction of the tarp, if you take my meaning. And by sort of screwing it down into the tent bag, I can make it a little bit easier to get it in there. And then step number 11, we're going to slide our poles and stakes down in there. I recommend, even though your tent may have come with a little bag for tent stakes, it's usually made out of tent body fabric and it's pretty fragile. So if you've got an assortment of stakes, some of them are going to be pretty sharp and they're eventually going to cut holes in that stake bag. So go down to the local mountaineering store and pick up a Cordura nylon bag for your tent stakes. That's going to keep them from ripping through the bag, and it'll also protect it from ripping through the tent bag itself. So just be real careful when you slide those stakes down in there. The other thing you'll notice is right here I've got my hand on the tent poles and I'm sliding them down in, but over to the right you can see the draw cord and the seam of the edge of the tent bag. You never want to shove your stakes down in there next to that seam or your tent poles. The seam is the weakest part of the tent bag, and if you create a lot of strain in that area, the seam can eventually come apart on you. So be real careful about that. Now, let's wrap up with a couple of points. Two of the greatest tent killers I've seen out there are dry rot and mold. You don't get too much dry rot with today's synthetics, but it can still be a factor with some tents. And mold, of course, it'll grow on just about anything. So when you get your tent home, you're going to want to take it out of the bag and hang the tent body, the rainfly, and the tarp up in a dry place until it's all completely dry. If you have the space, go ahead and set it up and just let it dry that way. You've got good airflow, open up your vents and so on, and let it really dry out. And then roll it back up according to these instructions I just showed you and store it until your next hunt. One issue that we have in Alaska is mice. And sometimes mice will get in there and they'll bore a hole all the way through the entire package just chewing on stuff. So the way you prevent that is you store your tents in a plastic tote box. And there's a lot of different kinds of boxes out there that you can use, but just make sure you've got it stored in something that the mice can't get to it. I've taken care of all of my tents in this way, and I've never had dry rot. I've never had holes or anything that compromised the integrity of my tents in over 30 years. This tent in this photo that I showed you is over 25 years old and is just as waterproof and strong as it was the day it was brand new. So if you take a little bit of time to take care of your tents, they're going to last your lifetime, and you're going to have a nice dry shelter to camp out in the Alaska outdoors on your